Every man dies twice. Once when his heart stops beating, and once when the last person who remembers him dies. Enoch never died at all. Genesis 5:24 records the most terrifying sentence in Scripture for mediocre men. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. While every other patriarch's biography ends with "and then he died," Enoch's chapter closes with divine extraction. He became too valuable to heaven to remain on earth. Here's what should shake you to your core. Enoch wasn't a prophet when he started walking with God. He wasn't born with supernatural gifts. He was a businessman, a father, a man dealing with the same pressures you face every Monday morning. The only difference was his decision to live in partnership with the Almighty instead of relying on human wisdom. The transformation from ordinary man to irreplaceable spiritual force didn't happen through religious activity. It happened through relationships so authentic that God himself couldn't bear separation. The difference between Enoch and every other man in history isn't what he accomplished, it's who he became. And that transformation holds the key to your spiritual legacy. Step into Enoch's sandals for a moment. Feel the dust of the antediluvian world beneath your feet. You're surrounded by a civilization that will be completely destroyed within 3 generations. Violence fills the earth. The sons of God are taking the daughters of men. Corruption spreads like gangrene through every institution. Yet Enoch walks with God. The Hebrew phrase "walked with God" is halakhat Elohim, a continuous, habitual lifestyle of divine companionship. This isn't Sunday morning spirituality or crisis-driven prayer. This is a man whose every decision, every conversation, every business transaction is conducted in the presence of the Almighty. But here's where most men miss the revolutionary nature of Enoch's walk. He lived during the greatest economic boom in human history. The antediluvian world possessed technology and knowledge that wouldn't be recovered until modern times. Men were living nearly 1,000 years, accumulating wealth and wisdom beyond imagination. The pressure to build, acquire, and dominate was intoxicating. Enoch had every earthly reason to focus on temporal success. Instead, he chose eternal partnership. Picture Enoch's daily routine. He rises before dawn not for productivity hacks, but for communion. His first thoughts aren't market reports or project deadlines, but conversations with his Creator. As he conducts business, settles disputes, raises his children, he operates from a different dimension. Men watch him handle pressure and wonder where his calm originates. They observe his decisions and marvel at his wisdom. They see his family dynamics and question their own leadership. Watch him negotiate contracts. While other merchants calculate margins and manipulate terms, Enoch's integrity is so absolute that his word becomes currency. Competitors can't understand how he prospers while maintaining such rigid ethical standards. The answer terrifies them. He operates from divine intelligence that makes human manipulation unnecessary. Observe him in crisis, when violence erupts around him, when moral chaos threatens his family, when economic turbulence shakes other leaders. Enoch remains unshakable. Not because he's naturally calm, but because he's receiving real-time guidance from the Creator of the universe. Enoch doesn't just believe in God. He lives as though God's presence is more real than the ground beneath his feet. Because for him it is. Hebrews 11:5 adds the crucial detail. By faith Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, because God had taken him away. For before he was taken he was commended as one who pleased God. He pleased God. Not impressed men. Not built empires. Not accumulated wealth. He pleased the one whose opinion determines eternal outcomes. The text reveals something else that transforms everything. Enoch was a father. Genesis 5:22 says, "After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters." Fatherhood didn't diminish his spiritual intensity, it ignited it. Something about holding his firstborn son triggered a spiritual awakening that lasted 3 centuries. This destroys the myth that spiritual depth requires sacrificing family leadership. Enoch's walk with God made him a better father, not a distracted mystic. His children didn't compete with his spirituality, they benefited from it. Imagine the household Enoch created. His children didn't just hear about God, they watched their father live in divine partnership. They saw prayer answered, wisdom granted, character forged in the furnace of daily communion. When Methuselah needed guidance, he didn't consult philosophers or rely on conventional wisdom. He asked his father, who consulted with God. Picture the dinner conversations. While other families discussed business ventures or social gossip, Enoch's table buzzed with divine encounters. His children grew up assuming that supernatural wisdom was normal, that character should be unshakable, that men were designed to walk with God. In 3 decades of counseling executives through spiritual crisis, I've identified the core problem. Men compartmentalize their faith instead of integrating their walk. Most Christian leaders operate from 2 separate operating systems. There's business you strategic, decisive, commanding respect. Then there's church you humble, uncertain, seeking approval. This division creates spiritual schizophrenia that destroys authentic authority. I've watched brilliant CEOs make billion-dollar decisions with unshakable confidence, then approach their prayer life with the timidity of a first-year seminary student. They command boardrooms but apologize for biblical convictions. They negotiate international deals but struggle to pray with authority. This fragmentation explains why Christian businesses often fail to outperform secular competitors despite claiming divine partnership. When your spiritual life operates separately from your strategic thinking, you're essentially running half a company. Enoch solved this problem 4,000 years before modern psychology identified it. He achieved complete integration. His walk with God wasn't a religious activity, it was his leadership operating system. Consider the strategic advantage this created. While other men relied on limited human perspective, Enoch accessed divine intelligence. While others made decisions based on incomplete information, Enoch operated with eternal perspective. While others built their reputations through self-promotion, Enoch's character spoke so loudly that God himself provided the endorsement. Here's what the business schools won't teach you. Integrated spiritual authority creates competitive advantage that cannot be replicated. When your decision-making process includes divine consultation, you consistently make choices that others later recognize as brilliant. When your character is forged through daily communion with God, you build trust that competitors spend fortunes trying to manufacture. The text says he walked with God for 300 years. That's not a weekend retreat or a monthly men's breakfast. That's 3 centuries of sustained spiritual discipline. This man understood something about consistency that eludes most leaders. Spiritual authority isn't built through intensity, it's forged through constancy. Most men operate in cycles. Spiritual intensity followed by spiritual neglect, moral victories followed by character compromise, divine encounters followed by human solutions. This creates unreliable leadership that people learn not to trust. Enoch's 300-year consistency established him as the most reliable man in human history. When he spoke, people listened because they'd watched him walk with God through every possible circumstance. His character had been tested and proven through 3 centuries of daily choices. Think about the leadership challenges Enoch faced. He lived in the most corrupt civilization in human history. Violence and moral decay surrounded him daily. The cultural pressure to compromise must have been overwhelming. Business partners probably mocked his integrity. Family members may have questioned his unwavering principles. Society certainly considered his spiritual devotion excessive. Yet he maintained his walk with God for 3 centuries without deviation. This reveals the fundamental difference between religious men and men of spiritual authority. Religious men adjust their convictions to match their circumstances, while men of spiritual authority adjust their circumstances to match their convictions. Enoch created such a powerful spiritual atmosphere around himself that corruption couldn't penetrate it. His presence literally changed the moral climate of every room he entered. This is what integrated spiritual authority accomplishes. It transforms environments rather than being transformed by them. The business implications are staggering. When you operate from this level of integrated authority, you don't just make ethical decisions, you create ethical cultures. You don't just maintain personal integrity, you establish organizational standards that outlast your tenure. You don't just build profitable enterprises, you construct generational wealth through biblical principles. This reveals the Enoch Protocol, spiritual modeling that becomes so consistent, so unshakable, that others naturally follow your lead. Most men lead through position, charisma, or competence. These create temporary influence that dissolves when circumstances change. Enoch led through presence, the unmistakable presence of a man who lived in partnership with the Almighty. People didn't follow his strategies, they followed his spirit. Consider the ultimate validation. God himself couldn't bear to let Enoch experience death. The creator of the universe became so attached to their daily fellowship that he extracted him from earth rather than endure separation. This wasn't divine favoritism, it was divine addiction. God became so accustomed to Enoch's companionship that losing him became unthinkable. That's the level of spiritual intimacy available to modern men who understand the Enoch Protocol. When your relationship with God becomes so authentic, so consistent, so transformative that heaven itself depends on your fellowship, you've discovered the secret to influence that transcends time. The Enoch Protocol operates on 4 foundational pillars that transform ordinary men into spiritual examples their bloodlines will follow for generations. Enoch didn't pray about decisions, he made decisions in prayer. His morning communion wasn't spiritual routine, it was strategic planning with the CEO of the universe. Every major choice, every family decision, every business transaction flowed from this partnership. Here's where most men fail. They treat prayer like a spiritual insurance policy instead of a strategic advantage. They pray when they're desperate, not when they're planning. They seek divine intervention in crisis rather than divine intelligence in preparation. Enoch understood that the creator of the universe possesses information unavailable through market research, financial analysis, or strategic consulting. Why would you make decisions affecting your family's future without accessing the perspective of the one who sees the end from the beginning? Implement this immediately. Before your phone, before coffee, before anything else demands your attention. Establish divine consultation. Not perfunctory prayer, but actual conversation. Present your day's challenges. Listen for guidance, then move forward with supernatural confidence. I've watched executives transform their organizations through this single adjustment. When you consistently operate from divine intelligence rather than human assumptions, you make decisions that others later recognize as prophetic. Your strategic thinking becomes so consistently accurate that competitors begin studying your decision-making process. Your sons are watching how you start each morning. They're learning whether their father operates from human wisdom or divine intelligence. The pattern you establish becomes their spiritual DNA. If they see you rushing into decisions without divine consultation, they'll assume that's how real men operate. If they observe you seeking divine wisdom before making choices, they'll carry that expectation into their own leadership. Enoch never switched between spiritual mode and leadership mode. His walk with God wasn't compartmentalized into religious activities. It permeated every aspect of his existence. His business ethics, family leadership, community influence all flowed from the same source. This integration creates authority that cannot be manufactured or replicated. When your spiritual convictions align perfectly with your business practices, when your family leadership reflects the same principles as your professional decisions, when your character remains consistent across every context, you establish credibility that transcends position or title. Men instinctively follow leaders whose authority appears unshakable because it's rooted in something deeper than circumstances. They sense when someone operates from convictions that won't bend under pressure. This creates magnetic leadership that draws others into your sphere of influence. But integration requires sacrifice. You'll lose business opportunities that conflict with biblical principles. You'll forfeit social connections that compromise your character. You'll refuse profitable ventures that violate your convictions. The short-term cost creates long-term competitive advantage that your compromised competitors cannot match. Your team needs to see that your integrity isn't situational. Your clients need to experience trustworthiness that stems from divine accountability. Your family needs to witness leadership that draws from eternal resources. When these audiences observe consistency across all contexts, they begin trusting your judgment in ways that create exponential influence. The text emphasizes that Enoch walked with God after he became the father of Methuselah. Fatherhood triggered his spiritual intensity. He understood that his walk with God would become his children's spiritual inheritance. This destroys the modern myth that spiritual depth conflicts with family leadership. Enoch's relationship with God enhanced his fatherhood rather than competing with it. His divine communion made him a better provider, protector, and spiritual leader. Methuselah lived 96 to 9 years longer than any human in recorded history. Coincidence? Or the result of growing up in a household where God's presence was as natural as breathing? His father's spiritual example literally added centuries to his life. Consider the compound effect of generational spiritual modeling. Your walk with God establishes spiritual DNA that influences your children's character, which shapes your grandchildren's potential, which determines your great-grandchildren's ceiling. But here's the crucial insight. Children don't inherit your theology. They inherit your authenticity. They won't remember your sermons, but they'll never forget your example. They're learning how real men relate to God by watching how you relate to God. If your spirituality appears manufactured or compartmentalized, they'll reject it as irrelevant. If your walk with God demonstrates genuine power and consistent character, they'll crave that same authenticity. Your children are currently forming their understanding of masculine spirituality by observing your daily choices. Are they learning that spiritual men are weak, uncertain, and apologetic? Or are they discovering that men who walk with God possess unshakable authority and supernatural wisdom? The patterns you establish today become the ceiling for their spiritual potential tomorrow. Your spiritual mediocrity limits their spiritual capacity. Your spiritual excellence expands their spiritual possibilities. Jude 14:15 reveals that Enoch was also a prophet. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone, and to convict all of them of their ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness. This transforms everything about understanding Enoch's influence. He wasn't just walking with God privately, he was speaking divine truth into cultural corruption publicly. His spiritual depth gave him the credibility to confront societal decay without compromise. Enoch lived in the most corrupt civilization in history. Yet he maintained both spiritual intimacy and prophetic authority. He didn't retreat from culture, he influenced. His walk with God gave him the platform to speak truth into moral chaos. This reveals the ultimate purpose of spiritual authority: cultural transformation. When your character becomes unassailable through divine communion, you earn the right to challenge systems, institutions, and individuals that operate contrary to biblical truth. Modern culture desperately needs men who combine spiritual depth with cultural engagement. Business communities need leaders who operate from biblical principles without apology. Educational institutions need influencers who refuse to compromise truth for acceptance. Political systems need participants who serve divine agenda rather than human ambition. Your walk with God should produce such authentic authority that people listen when you speak truth into societal confusion. Not because you're louder than others, but because your character validates your message. Not because you argue more skillfully, but because your life demonstrates the superiority of biblical principles. This is why Enoch's example remains essential 4,000 years later. In every generation, culture needs men whose spiritual authority gives them credibility to confront moral decay, challenge corrupt systems, and model authentic masculinity that others want to follow. The Enoch Protocol doesn't require religious career change, it demands spiritual depth that transforms your existing influence. Starting tomorrow morning, implement the Enoch Protocol. Rise before anyone else in your household. Spend the first hour of your day in actual conversation with God. Not reading about him, not studying theology, but talking with him about your day's challenges and listening for his guidance. This isn't spiritual discipline, it's strategic partnership. You're aligning your limited human perspective with unlimited divine intelligence before making decisions that impact others. Here's how to structure your dawn council. Begin with worship that acknowledges God's supremacy over your circumstances. Move into confession that clears any barriers to divine communication. Present your day's challenges with specific requests for wisdom. Spend time in silence listening for divine direction. Conclude with commitment to operate from the guidance you've received. The first week will feel awkward. Your mind will race with urgent tasks demanding attention. Your body will resist the earlier wake-up time. Your schedule will seem too pressed for this luxury. Push through this resistance. Enoch's 300-year consistency began with one morning of choosing divine partnership over human efficiency. Within 30 days, you'll notice your decision-making becoming more confident, your stress levels decreasing, and your authority expanding. Others will begin commenting on your increased wisdom and unshakable calm. You're accessing divine intelligence that transforms ordinary judgment into prophetic insight. Identify one area where you've been operating from human wisdom instead of divine guidance. Maybe it's a personnel decision that's been haunting your thoughts. Perhaps it's a financial strategy that feels risky despite seeming logical. Could be a family challenge where conventional advice isn't working. Apply the Enoch Protocol. Pray through the situation until you receive clear direction. Then act with supernatural confidence.
Don't second-guess divine guidance because it conflicts with human logic. Enoch's success came from trusting God's wisdom even when it contradicted conventional thinking. Watch how differently people respond when your decisions carry divine authority instead of human uncertainty. Your team will sense the confidence that comes from operating with inside information from the creator of the universe. Your family will feel the security that flows from leadership anchored in eternal wisdom. Document these experiences. Keep a record of divine guidance received and outcomes produced. Over months, you'll build a personal testimony of God's faithfulness that strengthens your faith for bigger challenges ahead. Enoch pleased God for 300 years. That requires consistent character that withstands daily pressure. Each month, evaluate whether your walk with God is producing the kind of character that would make heaven reluctant to let you go. Are you becoming more trustworthy, more wise, more gracious under pressure? Is your spiritual life producing tangible character transformation that others can observe? Would your competitors describe you as a man of unshakable integrity? Do your employees trust your judgment implicitly? Does your family feel secure under your leadership regardless of external circumstances? Character assessment requires brutal honesty. Identify areas where your walk with God hasn't produced the consistency Enoch demonstrated. Maybe you're spiritually strong in private but compromise under public pressure. Perhaps you maintain integrity in major decisions but cut corners in minor choices. Could be you're growing in wisdom but lacking in compassion. Target these character deficiencies with specific spiritual disciplines. If you struggle with anger, intensify your morning communion until divine peace becomes your default response. If you battle with integrity, increase your accountability to God until honesty becomes automatic. If you lack wisdom, deepen your scripture meditation until divine perspective shapes every decision. Begin building spiritual modeling that your bloodline will follow for generations. Your great-great-grandson will face challenges you can't imagine, but the spiritual DNA you establish today will determine his resources for those battles. Create family traditions that reinforce divine consultation. Establish weekly family councils where major decisions are prayed through together. Institute annual retreats where your family evaluates their collective walk with God. Build traditions around biblical holidays that connect your children to spiritual heritage. Establish decision-making patterns that demonstrate supernatural wisdom. When facing family crises, show your children how to seek divine guidance before human solutions. When celebrating successes, model gratitude that acknowledges God's role in your achievements. When confronting moral challenges, demonstrate conviction that doesn't bend under pressure. Build a household where God's presence is so natural that your children assume this level of spiritual partnership is normal. Pray before family meals not as religious routine but as genuine gratitude. Discuss divine guidance in daily conversations. Share testimonies of God's faithfulness in overcoming challenges. Create an atmosphere where supernatural intervention feels more common than rare coincidence. Evaluate how your walk with God is creating influence that transforms culture rather than being transformed by it. Are you speaking biblical truth into your professional sphere? Is your business demonstrating kingdom principles that others want to emulate? Are you mentoring younger men in authentic spiritual authority? Identify platforms where your spiritual credibility creates opportunity for cultural influence. Maybe it's your industry association that needs biblical leadership. Perhaps it's your community development board that lacks moral compass. Could be your professional network that hungers for authentic authority. Like Enoch, use your spiritual depth to earn the right to speak prophetically into moral confusion. Don't retreat from corrupt systems, transform them through authentic spiritual authority. Your walk with God should produce such unassailable character that people listen when you challenge ungodly practices. The Enoch Protocol's ultimate goal isn't just spiritual growth, it's becoming so valuable to heaven that God becomes reluctant to let you go. Then your fellowship with the Almighty becomes so authentic, so consistent, so transformative that divine relationship becomes the organizing principle of your existence. You've discovered influence that transcends time. This level of spiritual intimacy creates authority that cannot be manufactured, wisdom that cannot be learned, and character that cannot be shaken. Men naturally follow leaders who operate from this dimension because they sense connection to power beyond human capacity. Your bloodline has been waiting for a spiritual example they can follow. Your organization needs leadership that operates from eternal perspective. Your generation requires men who demonstrate that intimate relationship with God produces unshakable authority in every area of life. Enoch never died because he became too valuable to heaven to leave on earth. What would have to change in your walk with God for heaven to consider you that valuable? The transformation begins with tomorrow morning's conversation with the Almighty. Everything else flows from there. Walk with God like Enoch. The generations following you depend on it.